directory so he could use it recruiting Latino candidates throughout the state. So we said, sure. And Alejandro has been in Georgia just a couple of years. His main career was in Arizona, where he has always been an organizer and a campaign worker for mainly Latino candidates. He helped elect Ruben Gallego in Arizona, who is now challenging Kirsten Sinema, and Senator Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada, among others. And you could really say that organizing is in his blood because he is actually the grandson of Cesar Chavez. So Alejandro, please tell us about yourself and what you're doing.
Fantastic, thank you. And I don't have any cool slides like the people before me, so just get to see this. So yeah, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I've worked across a variety of groups. I worked for MoveOn.org. I ran the federal field for the Iran deal. I worked on healthcare. I mean, I've been around the block, right? Like, I'm sure all of you all remember these fights, and we're probably right in the center of all of them. I've also worked on the election side. So for Democracy for America, I ran their federal election program and helped identify people like Joe Nugis, Katie Porter, who else? Veronica Escobar. So a lot in candidate recruitment, and then even down ballot stuff, all the way down to city council. So I've worked on a variety of campaigns and done a little bit of union work as well. So I have a wide scope of what I do. And while I've mostly done Latino work, you know, I've done outreach in a lot of different ways. I was the political director for marijuana legalization in Arizona. So we've done a lot. It passed by the largest margin of 60%, more than any other initiative in the country. And I will say that coincidentally ran concurrent with the 2020 presidential campaign, and the turnout that happens with that on the ballot across the country, whether you're looking at Michigan, you know, you're looking at Kentucky, you're looking at Mississippi, Arizona, Nevada, it really, really does well for up ticket and down ticket candidates. So timing it in the time of, you know, a presidential election, or in some cases a gubernatorial election, can be very huge in helping turnout. That's just a side note I've learned from working in that field, and that's really huge when we're talking about what we're trying to build here. And you know, why I'm so excited I came to Move. I've been here, living here a full year, but I've been doing work here since 2017. OSOF, Latinos for OSOF, for I'm sure you all remember that, 2017. That was the first time I walked in Georgia and canvassed in some heat, like in like humidity. I've always walked in the middle of the desert. I walked in 122-degree temperature in Arizona, right? Like, so, and I've done it here in, you know, 90-degree heat with, I think, 120% humidity. So I've definitely done it. I know the hardships, but I also know the important work. And even as a deputy director, I do it because it helps connect me to what we're doing. It helps connect me to the narratives, the stories, the people. There's things you can learn in there that aren't in a 1, 2, or 3. Are you likely to vote? Unlikely to vote? Who would you vote for if the election were today? That's fine, but that doesn't tell me what makes me and makes this movement stronger. Even going outside of the election, what makes us stronger when we canvass is those stories we hear of how no one's marked, no one's walked on their block before. How many of you have been there? This is the first time anyone's ever knocked on my door, right? Or when you're walking and you suddenly realize, wow, there's only 2 people that are in my target. Why am I not hitting every door? Right? Like, you have these things and you learn more and you understand more. It helps us grow and helps the movement as a whole become stronger. And that's kind of where this is all coming from. And my experiences brought me to this moment right now here in Georgia. You know, Georgia has 1.1 million roughly Latinos. By 2050, 2020, next 25 years, it's going to be maybe 2.5 million, the fastest growing population. And yes, we know that there are some people that can't vote. Okay. There's a crap load that can't vote that are not registered. And there's even more that are registered that just don't vote. And This is the problem, the mathematical formula we're all trying to solve. How do we solve this challenge? You know, high schools, I use the college students all the time. Look, I've registered college, but I worked for Next Gen too. So I ran their distributed organizing. I've worked everywhere. You know, I say this all the time. People love to do college registration, and it's great. But let me tell you about something about college students. If they got into college, they're pretty responsible. You give them a register to vote, they're likely to turn out and be educated. It's those who graduate from high school and haven't gone to college and community college. That's where we need double, triple, and quadruple down. That's where Tom Steyer's Next Gen actually needs to be. They don't need to be at the University of Georgia. They need to be at all the community colleges, the trade schools. That's where we need to make up the biggest ground and gain. So we know for that to happen, that representation matters. And that it's not just one generation or one election, that we're in this for the long haul. And, you know, I'll mention later how the people we're looking at for 2023 city council races may win, may lose. If they lose, they could be a legislative candidate in 2024. And if they decide in 2024 that they lose and they win, maybe they're a city council or a mayor candidate in 2025. And this is how we are thinking of building. Right now, I think you have a total of maybe 15 open Latino candidates or elected officials across the state. And I say open because I guess recently some people have identified, come out more Latino than they have in previous years. And there's people out there who, you know, don't identify as Latino as maybe their upbringing, and that's fine. Where we know is that does not reflect our numbers in the state, doesn't even reflect the growing numbers of the state. So if we want people to engage and be part of the process, not just in voting, we have to get them involved in the decision-making process as well. So a group of people came together and I became available. And they said, hey, we want to create something that's for Latino candidates to be recruited, supported, and trained to run for office, knowing that those who don't will maybe become campaign staff. I say right now that even if we were to run 20 Latinos for the office, we don't have 20 staff people to support them. So what would happen? They're going to go and hire white consultants and white general accountants. And by the time they get to Congress, we're locked out. They've already have their team. And that's why we have Congress that's made up of 90% white men in chief of staff leadership, where we actually know decisions are made. And this Atlanta City Council, it has nothing to do with federal, it's everywhere, right? And then so how do we adjust that? It's at this level of school board, city council, legislature, we help elect these candidates with people and provide them with the staff that they can grow and build with. And as they do that, they take our values with them. So where do we start? Well, one of the biggest things and all of you who are people of color here probably know this. You know, the number one reason why Black and brown, does anyone here know why the number one reason that Black and brown people don't run for office? Anyone want to take a guess? Nobody asked them.
Money also.
Yeah, money's number two. No one asked them. In fact, there's a lot of times when they run, they get challenged. And we also know that if you live in a Black community, you have Latinos. And if you live in a Latino community, you have Black people. It's just, that's not a Georgia thing. That's a United States thing. And that's a different conversation we can talk about. But that's why it's important that we're having both. I always talk about Rep. Kim Schofield. She's a great example. You know, she does a lot of work in the Latino community. She represents a lot of Latino people, a lot of brown people, and that's great. And we need more Black and brown representation in city councils, where we know that cities are not appropriate representation. All this brings us into identifying these candidates as well. Some of these cities, and Pam, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this list, that some of these cities, like what is it? Pearson? Am I saying that right? That here's a great example. Its website isn't even functioning. Like if you need anything, you have to go to the city, right? Like you have to. Check this out. Do you know that has 37% Latino people. 1,500, I think it was maybe 1,600 voters roughly is what it is. We don't know. Could you imagine if there's really 37% of them are actually Latinos who are eligible to vote? That's a city that should be represented by Latinos and brown people. And maybe it's actually, you have strong Black leadership down there, and that 37% can help a Black person be the next mayor, or we have a predominantly Black and brown city council. So that's what this group wants to work on. We're working on the name Palante, which means ahead, charge, move forward. And the reason why I'm here is I'm not going to be able to do this kind of the way you all are doing this and sending emails. We have to spend the times in the community. I have to spend, 2 or 3 days in Dalton, 2 or 3 days in Hall County, and not just driving up. I mean, and I've done this all over the country, right? You go, I eat at diners, I talk to staff, we talk to waitresses or waiters, waitresses, servers, baristas. You talk to groups like bus boys, bussers. You talk to them, you look at cities. Those are where you actually find the people, right? And when we're talking about representation, I think we should be clear. We're not just talking about representation of Black and brown, but actually people that do the work we do. We have plenty of lawyers and business people as representation. How about some more teachers? How about some stay-at-home parents? How about some nurses? I mean, I imagine they must have an idea of what's going on in the city and have an idea of how to run it if they're asked to do all that. And so the reason why I'm here today is because as we're starting to build this, a lot of communities don't necessarily have a huge Latino population, or if they do, it might be within a larger Black population, and there's just a small pocket. Or it's somewhere like in Whitfield, where basically the Latino population, from what I understand and from what I've seen, lives pretty much in Dalton, the city of Dalton, pretty much. It's like 80% of the Latino population lives there. And so being in Dalton and staying there 2 or 3 days. So one is, if you all have any strong Latino leaders that you can connect me with, I'll put my email and so forth in here. Or you would like to connect with me and talk about how you can engage other people. Or my favorite one is Alejandro. I know someone and they would be great. Just, they need a little support. And that's exactly what we're here to do. The other thing is, as we build this out, there are parts for all this. And I know someone mentioned about the volunteering. And I think that all of you could play, especially when we're talking about small city councils and school board races. So I would encourage you to think about how to participate. There's 50 people on here. If you all gave one candidate $10 in a city council race of 1,500 people, that's it, $500. That's it. That's their mailer for their city 2 times, right? And so I know that sometimes we get thought up in, we need 200,000, 300,000, 400,000. Yes, you do for a federal campaign, but a school board, a city council, where we're building the bench and identifying and building out these programs, we can support and build out together. And that is where I think, or that's where we are betting that we could actually see the Latino support. So I've gone on for a long time, but I definitely am open to any questions or feedback or thoughts, and I'll put my information in while we do all this.
Let's see, we had a few in the chat. Well, besides all the compliments to you, that's what most of the chat is. One comment from Becky is, as you identify races, will you let us know which races you weigh in on so we can help?
I was typing, I didn't want you all to hear my fingers clicking. Absolutely. And I want this to be I would really hope for this to be a two-way process of where you all are actually identifying people and letting me know. Because I think what's going to happen is, and from my experience of doing this in other places, is that somebody knows one Latino, and right now we're even opening to people that are Latino supporting, but maybe not in an area, right? Like we're opening to that, but that someone knows that you all know 1 or 2 people who actually know the 5 or 6. You all are most engaged in your community. You know who is going to do things, and who's just full of crap, right? who's going to join and just give me BS, and they're never going to return calls, and that's fine. Like that's useful, but you all are where I'm hoping to be able to get the feedback and take that, and then we build it together. So yes, and I would encourage you all to send things my way, or even if you want to meet for coffee somewhere in your city where there's a Latino area, I'm happy to meet there, and I'm really, really good at meeting people, as I'm sure you all can imagine, and connecting. Let's see. Sorry, I was typing. Could you please provide?
Pam,
Oh.
could I just ask a clarifying question?
Mhm.
This is great. This all sounds great. Are you, I may have missed it. Are you working for an organization or establishing an organization now?
Yeah, we're working together with several other Latino leaders. We are in the process of determining what it will be. I'm voting and pushing for a state PAC. The truth is, there's probably no Latino running for federal office anytime soon in Georgia. While we have many great candidates, some of them need support. Jason Esteves is great, but Phil Aleo, he's going to need support. Not that I think he's in damage, but he also did not come from school board and kind of some of the things that Jason did. And there are other people. Pedro's usually pretty good. I mean, he doesn't really need anybody's help. He does fine on his own. There are a few people that are new that we're going to support. So we are most likely going to be a state PAC. But that's not for sure. And we could end up being a C4. But I will say that my experience with the C4 world and Latinos is there's a lot of great ones doing it. Absolutely. But you actually have to say a candidate's name at the door. Because there were things, for example, in the last election, a lot of brown people, Walker, Warnock, black man, in the rush of everything, it happened. There were people like, oh, Walker, no. Oh, Stacey Warnock. And that's why when I was with Galeo, we did the El Pastor Loteria card, because we wanted to elevate, not that Warnock was the better on Latino issues, but that he was a pastor, because that was clear to our community to identify the two difference of a Warnock was too much sometimes, especially if you have an accent, if language is not your first, if English isn't your first language. So it was important that we were able to identify and say, we're going to use Loteria card, because it was really big during the runoff and everyone's kind of using it during the holidays, to make that connection that he was the pastor. But we weren't confident just saying, here's a person that supports your values, this and that, and we had to be clear about saying the name. So that's why I'm thinking a state PAC, as opposed to just a C4 where we're limited and not being able to do that. I'll be honest, I want this thing to have guts. We want this thing to have guts. We want it to have teeth. And sometimes you can be hindered by that with the C3 and C4 status. Some of the work we will be doing will be C3 and recruiting and educating, right? That's pretty much C3. But really the idea is, look, as you've told, I've worked at a lot of these organizations, Democratic Party groups and all these groups, and I've worked at C3s and C4s, and everybody has the best of intentions, but there's a lot of bark. And every year we talk about the record-breaking registration we've done and the record-breaking calls we've made and the record-breaking knocks we've made, and we're still losing by the same percentage.
Alejandro, before we need to move on, we do have one question we'd love to have you answer.
Yeah.
One of our members said, I'm surprised by the number of Latino voters who identify more with Republican candidates than Democrat. Are there priorities in the Latin community that are being overlooked by the Democratic Party?
Yes, yes. And some of it is just, some of it is not necessarily Democratic Party's fault. They don't necessarily have the funding to send an organizer to live in Dalton for a campaign season. So it's hard, right? There's some of those restraints, and 75% of the Latino population in Georgia lives in the Atlanta metro area, right? So, but every time you don't do that outreach, that means every election cycle, our ring gets smaller until eventually we've suffocated ourselves. So I don't think it's an intentional thing. I think there's things we could do in messaging. And last thing I'll wrap up with in messaging about that is, how many times have you seen something in Spanish? And it's actually perfect. Even the context is perfect. The way they've translated it, everything is perfect. but you see it in black and white or just one or two colors. Now, how many of you have ever seen Folklorico? How many of you have ever seen Carnival? If it doesn't have 7 or 8 colors, Latinos are not thinking it's something fun to go to. So before you make any events and before you have them translated, put them in like, look up something like a fiesta, look up a quinceañera, look up one of those things and just see the colors and then design your graphic with some of that in mind. I put my information there. I know you've all got to move on, and I'm sorry, I kind of rambled on. I get excited. And I will say that Republicans are not winning us over. It's just that less are showing up to vote for Democrats. So that percentage of the pie looks bigger. We're just not giving Democrats, aren't just giving Latinos a reason to vote. And the immigration, we care about more than immigration. Latinos, go broke putting their kids through private school with money they don't have all the time, paying for college for kids who don't have. You have a mom that's working, 60 years old, 70 years old, still in the kitchen, a father 70 years old, still cutting grasses. Their bodies are beat up, but they're doing it because they're still putting an equal hija through college. And so we should remember that every issue is a Latino issue.
Thank you so much. We're so excited to have you here. What you just said about the colors, that was so interesting to me. Never would have occurred to me. So thank you so much. And we hope you stick around.